normal course of business that need to change.
I think I come with a very fresh perspective.
Stay tuned, but it's going to be an exciting time.
Don, the legislature wrapped up last week, and I guess the last 7 to 10 days we've seen a lot of more, in my words, more politics, more apologies, more leadership candidates, more union deals, and more problems for the former premier. Lots to talk about. Let's start with the legislature session, and let's talk about what happened this week. Specifically, let's talk about the union deal that caused some problem for the government, and that was the pension bill, particularly Bill 9. The government took a step back from that this week. Why did they do so?
They had to. This wasn't just about that bill. It was about a general collapse that was going on, and about a big reversal of field for the government on many issues, because they know a lot of the things weren't working. I mean, the fact is that when they introduced Bills 45 and 46, I am led to understand that people in the Justice Department actually told them those bills wouldn't carry. They were unconstitutional. They had Bill 46 slapped down by the courts. They ended up basically caving to AUP and giving the union movement a huge sense of militancy, and we can get back at these guys for what they did. But it was something they had to do. Well, they frame it as, hey, we're just improving legislation, just the way we do it. One day they're gonna pass it. The next day they refer it to committee. Big victory for all the opposition parties, because all three of them were united against this bill, and certainly for the unions.
More leadership issues. So we got a new leadership candidate, and Rick McIver. He announced on the front lawn of his home in Calgary that he was going to be the second official candidate going against Ken Hughes. We're still waiting for Jim Prentice. And speaking of Jim Prentice, he made an appearance at the PC annual Leaders Dinner in Calgary on Thursday. Where do we sit right now with this leadership race?
Well, it's starting. We still don't have Prentice officially, and McIver announced on his lawn, and the only refreshments I saw were some Timbits and Tim Hortons coffee on a trestle table on the neighbors. It was very folksy indeed, but it's exactly what McIver is trying to do. He's trying to be the everyman, the sort of Ralph Klein echo. And I thought he did that rather well. He's saying basically this is not going to be a government for the elite anymore. If he runs it, it's going to be a government by the people, of all 4.1 million of them.
All right, I'm James Wood, political reporter with the Calgary Herald, and we're here with Rick McIver, Calgary Hayes MLA, who just announced that he is running for progressive conservative leadership. So Rick, thanks for doing this. We just wanted to ask you, what's going to be the focus of your campaign, and how are you going to differentiate yourself from the other candidates in the race?
Well, the focus of the campaign is going to be a shift from establishment of thinking to some common sense new thinking. There's just some core values that need to be established or reestablished that I think Albertans want, and are just, I think they're hungry for someone to actually put those things in place.
Okay. You were known when you were on City Council as a fiscal hawk, a fiscal conservative. How much is that going to be an issue for you in the campaign?
You know what? Every member of every political party in Alberta, if you ask them individually, will tell you they're a fiscal conservative. Even the NDPs would say they're fiscal conservatives. So I don't see it as an issue. I see it as a plus. And I think you mix that with some common sense and some understanding that with 100,000 people coming every year that we still need to keep building Alberta. I think that's a combination that I think many Albertans will find favorable.
Okay. So just a final question. Obviously in 2010 you had a tough defeat in your run for mayor. So what makes you keep on doing this, and what makes you want to enter this kind of contest again?
You know what? I think I can make a difference. I care, and it's what's in my heart.
Okay. What did you learn from that defeat?
Well, if I didn't have humility before it, I learned a little bit after it. I'll tell you that. But the other thing I learned is that there's no sure thing, and that as long as you're serving, it's going to be fine. It's important to, as long as you're doing service, your life is good.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much, Rick.
Prentice, on the other hand, meanwhile was burrowing away on the Leaders' Dinner, which was, it has to be said, an absolutely stunning success. The biggest. I've probably been to 25 of these things, maybe more. And that was the biggest by far I've ever seen. 170 tables, 1,800 people. It couldn't be seen as anything but a success, and Prentice had a great deal to do with organizing that. And a lot of people went, I'm convinced, rather than just to hear Dave Hancock, they wanted to see or hear Jim Prentice, which they did briefly. But
Dave Hancock talked about the fact that don't count this party out. They're more resilient than their opponents will give them credit for. Was he right?
Yes. I don't know how many times they've seen it be on their knees, and The spring of 1993 was a classic example. They were at 17% on the polls. They won. So you don't count them out. Like, are they in trouble? Yes, like never before. The brand is tarnished, like as it's never been before. It isn't just they had a problem with the leader. The party itself is now stuck with a lot of this. So they've got a long way to climb back, but you never count them out.
At that dinner we saw more apologies. I'm calling it the 2014, all apologies tour, Dave Hancock, where he's apologizing for everything, seemingly.
Last week, on behalf of our government and our caucus, I apologized to party members and to Albertans for talking too much and for listening too little.
Is that strategy working?
You know, maybe not, but think of if they keep doing this for another 5 months, everybody would be so sick of apologies, and the new person won't have to apologize for anything because there'd be nothing left to apologize for. So it's part of a conscious strategy. They call it taking out the trash at the legislature, just getting some tone set to show that they care. I mean, I thought the most significant thing Hancock said was at the press briefing before his speech, where he said they took people for granted. And I think Albertans in general feel that they have been taken for granted. Things were done without their consent, without their knowledge, and that does just include things like the Sky Palace, but lots of policy things. And Hancock's just trying to set a different tone to show that, yeah, we're going to do this differently now.
My last more is more of Premier Redford, or ex-Premier Redford. We found out the details on the so-called Sky Palace, that the province actually spent $173,000 on a project that it never built, to build a living quarters for her in the federal building in near the legislature. And we also saw the reappearance of Alison Redford after being missing for, I believe, 12 days from the legislature. She hadn't appeared since her resignation last month. How did that play into the politics of last week?
Well, the sad reality of it is that she's still an invisible, the most powerful invisible politician I've seen, in the sense of the impact she has on the landscape, because the stories about her are still damaging for sure. And you don't very often see a leader leave and then have one thing after another come out after they've left this way. So her appearance in the legislature, as so many of these things have been, was odd. It was very brief, and she gave some brief interviews, and that was it, and that was the last we saw of her. But you get the feeling it's not over yet.
Let's talk a little bit now about the session. The session began on March the 3rd with high hopes for this government. I remember Alison Redford, had a meeting on the very first day to rally the caucus in it, and I think they were really trying to show that they could bounce off some low poll results, and of course the issues over the expenses of South Africa, and then her leadership just snowballed. I equate it to be some sort of car crash on the QE2 where just one car smashed into the other and it just kept getting worse and worse. Have you seen a session like this before? No.
Think of it. The session started with one premier, ended with another. The next session of the legislature in the fall will start with a third premier. When the session began, the government had a lot to look forward to. They were coming out with a budget with a genuine surplus for the first time in 6 years, or at least they say it's genuine. The opposition would argue, but the books are much, much better, and they're going to get better still. The economy is roaring. They've got all kinds of sort of general factors that they can look forward to and think they're doing well and even boast about in the economy. But politically, it just turned into a complete and utter train wreck, with the premier being on top when the legislature opened, then astonishingly resigning, and then disappearing, and then coming back, and then then all the policy backups where the government realized that, yeah, they did have some serious political trouble on some of these strange initiatives like the labor bills that they had to get out of, and get out of fast. So what started as something they thought would bump them up in the polls ended up as a session that dropped them further.
Okay, our favorite segment of the week, Don, winners and losers. Who's your winner?
I'd have to say Jim Prentice. He's been the mystery man, the enigmatic, silent non-candidate who will run. He organized he was asked last December by the party to organize the Calgary Leaders Dinner when Redford was there, and he agreed to do that.
Right.
So then, but then she quits, and Jim Prentice is going to be a candidate, and Jim Prentice is organizing this thing that everybody in town was saying they were having trouble selling tickets to. And Jim Prentice is the guy who's responsible for selling tickets. And then, when the thing actually happens, there are 1,800 people there, the biggest crowd they've ever had. Jim Prentice showed, and apparently he sold about 50% of those tickets through personal connections. So he showed the party that he can raise money. Now, it may not mean much to the general public, and they may not even like it, but that is one of the key skills that PCs want to see in their leaders.
Right.
Get some money into the Treasury so we can run an election campaign. I'd say in my mind, there's no question about who won the week. It was Jim Prentice.
Now, my winner was the anti-Jim Prentice here, and that is Rick McIver. I thought Rick positioned himself very smartly as you pointed out, the populist candidate, the anti-establishment candidate to run in this PC leadership campaign. And he almost became, if there was going to be an anybody but Jim Prentice movement, you got to wonder if it's going to coalesce around Rick McIver, because he is so different and he brings a different skill set. We saw him sort of channeling his inner Mike Harris, talking about common sense, and his inner Ralph Klein, talking about the Marthas and Henrys. I thought it actually was a very skilled campaign launch, and I thought he showed that he's a candidate to be reckoned with.
I agree with that.
Who's your loser of the week?
This is a session loser. I think since the session is over, we have to say it was Alison Redford who began the session as premier, ended it. I thought it ended on the most sad and poignant note. What happened was that on the second last day of the session, the House agreed to give tributes to Brian Mason, who of course resigned as NDP leader coming in the fall. And so it was a warm and funny, and everybody loves Brian, and it's easy for the PCs to love him because he'll never beat them and so forth. But it was very interesting and touching. But there's another person in the House who still is an MLA who was resigned as leader. Exactly the same situation. And there wasn't a word about her. There may, we think, be some tributes to her later. But it was kind of sad to see that in political terms for the government, there was just nothing done for her at all.
She's persona non grata.
She politically, very much so. Maybe that'll fade and maybe they'll do something later. But that to me was just unprecedented. You don't have a premier quit and don't have tributes.
Well, my loser of the week was Jeff Johnson. I thought that the government spent so much money, so much political capital trying to repair the relationship with the AUP and other organized labor groups over the past 2 or 3 weeks, and then they managed to irritate beyond belief another powerful union body, being the ATA. We know teachers vote. We know they got out and they helped support Alison Redford both in the 2012 campaign and the 2011 leadership campaign, and yet here we are with them at loggerheads with the government. I thought, given the fact that this report came out and obviously wasn't handled very well, or at least wasn't handled well for the union's liking, he becomes my loser of the week.
Yeah, I can't disagree.
But it's going to be an exciting time. And
Are we talking days or hours?
We're talking shortly, and so stay tuned. And when I start, you'll know it.
Why not tell us now?